and very much welcome you all to our first Inclusive Innovation webinar with the theme this morning of health and social care. This webinar is the start of our series of engaging events that are being held in partnership with CEIS Community Enterprise in Scotland. And before we meet our fantastic panel that we've lined up for you for our fireside chat this morning, let me quickly run through some housekeeping. Now, I won't be showing you to your nearest fire exit because I think we're still all in the comfort of our dining rooms or equivalent, but just some quick, I suppose, housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be hosted online afterwards. So if any delegates don't wish to be recorded, could you please have your camera off and remain on mute? But you can still very much participate in using the chat function to pose any questions. And we do hope that the discussions this morning will spark lots of questions and ideas. And there are two ways of participating. You can use the raised hand function, which is under reactions at the bottom of your screen, or you can use the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen, to pose any questions. And the questions posed within the chat function will be discussed at the end of our fireside chat, and that will be managed by my colleague Fiona Kerr. So without further ado, let's just set the scene in the second slide, which tells you a little bit about the aim of this programme and which we have developed with CEIS. So it's very much designed to raise awareness of the support and resources available to all organisations, entrepreneurs and individuals with innovative solutions. And these solutions are really helping to address societal and environmental issues within Scotland and beyond. And we're placing particular emphasis on facilitating and supporting innovation across Scotland's third sector. And in slide 3, just to outline that throughout the discussions, there's very much a broad range of support available to unlock talent or to support through technical market research challenges and access and funding. Inclusive innovation is all about getting your idea off the ground. And we really want to encourage everybody that no mission is impossible. Joe, I think we're on to slide 4 now about the interface team, which has a long-standing track record of making connections between organisations and the many different academic teams throughout Scotland's universities and colleges. And the next slide, Joe, just shows how this free service has matched up many hundreds of businesses located the length and breadth of Scotland. And these realise big benefits. So, for example, 83% of the organisations that we've supported have recorded reduced operating costs, increased productivity, profits, managed exports, increased their turnover, and developed new or safeguarded jobs. Now, the priorities through these inclusive webinars, and also in particular for the interface team, are to very much inspire the art of the possible. And that's what we're hoping when you meet our panel of speakers shortly. And through the inspiration, really support innovation of all different shapes and sizes, of all different types. And that really delivers impacts for our people and for our planet. We use this journey of inclusive innovation to inform and support change that makes a real difference to all people's lives. But most importantly, we are inclusive and open to all. And so delighted to have you joining us this morning to represent a whole series of different organisations from across Scotland. And the next slide will just explain or just show that at the end of the session, I'll explain the next steps. But without further ado, let's start our fireside chat for the next 20 minutes or so and be inspired to innovate as you hear from our panel. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Alison Wood, who's founder and CEO of Floco, which is formerly known as Lilypads, and Graeme Bisland, the Senior Research and Development Engineer at NMIS, which is the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland. Thanks, Joe. I think you can stop the slides there and we'll move to our 5-slide chat. So welcome, Alison and Graeme. Delighted to have you here this morning. Alison, let's put the spotlight on you to start with, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about Floco and what inspired you to set up an enterprise with social innovation at its heart.
Thanks, Siobhán. So Floco is a reusable period pad company. We do 3 different things that merge together to make the business though. We design reusable pads here. We found that for a lot of women, the reusable pads just, well, any kind of pad isn't quite up to scratch. And so looking at something that's comfortable and ensures people can have the best period they can. And that very much sponsors all of our other initiatives. So we focus on teaching puberty and gender equality education in schools right across Scotland, getting people to discuss what is puberty and also what the different stereotypes we have around it and the harms that they can create. And very much the focal point for us is our international mission. So we now work across 8 countries. We support women within communities in those countries to set up their own businesses. They sell the pads that we design at a subsidized cost and ensure that they have access to products that don't currently exist and in areas where period poverty really is at its worst. So I started with the international mission. It's something that's evolved and become a much stronger part of who we are. We started about 4 years ago now. At some point I'm going to be able to say that with a lot more confidence and not continuously have to be like, when was it that we started? The years keep rolling by. When I was doing my academic research, probably why working with universities is kind of fascinating to me, because it's something that this was born out of academia, and then being able to touch base and involve other people's is quite a cool process to do it. But anyway, part of my dissertation was looking at how we effectively teach sexual health. That took me out to rural Kenya with a charity that I knew and loved, and we were looking at what education was working, what wasn't, why the teenage pregnancy rate was so high, the HIV rate was 1 in 4, and they really needed a better system. What it turned out was that the girls couldn't afford period products, and so they were exchanging them for sex with men in the village. And it turned out that wasn't an isolated incident. In fact, it's very common practice in the area they're in. And the more we grew, the more it became obvious it's common practice in quite a few countries around the world, which is when innovation, manufacturing, design became very important, because what we needed to do was change the design of a standard reusable pad to something that's much easier to mass manufacture and manufacture at a low cost. And that's kind of been our journey for the last 3 years, is looking at how do you ethically reduce the cost of manufacture. There are lots of different ways to do it. And how do you do that without compromising the design? Anyone who has worn a period product before knows that crucial function of absorbing fluid and then not sending said fluid everywhere else is kind of critical. And therefore making sure that we're designing with that in mind, that we don't create a product that goes haywire, has been very important, but has meant that we can now work and do really cool things with different organizations. We go right from donating products in the likes of Malaysia to refugees from different countries, through to helping South African persons set up a business where they can go into their local townships and sell their version of the pad.
Thanks, Alison. That's true inclusive innovation across not just Scotland and the UK, but also many countries. And it's great to hear all that you've been kind of doing since you did and how it was founded on your initial dissertation. And I know that we'll focus, speaking to Graeme, on one particular aspect on the manufacturing, but maybe you could give our listeners a snapshot of some of the other ways that you have collaborated with academics throughout Scotland.
We've done a few now. I think the cool one to me at the moment is looking at all different materials and like bacterial searches. So in some countries around the world, you must do certain testing to prove your product is safe. Sadly, that is not the case in the UK. Anything is acceptable. If you can hear my voice, that is probably that I'm on a different wavelength to that. But that does mean that getting that testing done is really difficult, because most industrial test houses aren't set up to do bacterial testing. Funnily enough, a lot of our universities spend a lot of time dealing with that kind of stuff. When I working with a university where my description was like, I remember at school we had to try and grow stuff in an agar plate, and what I want you to do is see if you can do that with the pad. And they were like, what you'll find is what you actually want is this, but yes, we can help. So we've done lots of work around that, around product development, also through interface. And then we do different things now with universities around teaching, training up their students to talk about gender equality, to be able to stand up when there's a problem and report it. And in some, to go into schools and teach gender equality and puberty and menstrual health to school children and kind of show them what it looks like to grow up in this world.
That's great, Alison, and we'll come back and chat maybe about some of those other areas, and particularly on the education area in a couple of minutes. But I'd like to welcome Graeme to join us. And Graeme, in your particular, I suppose, area, and you've worked with Alison over the past couple of months, particularly on the manufacturing side. Maybe you'd outline how you've got involved in the business and what the role of NMIS and your colleagues at Ayrshire College are actually helping in the business.
No problem at all. So I suppose first off, we were introduced to Alison through Interface, and then we signposted Alison to Ayrshire College, identifying sort of they would be a good fit to help progress certain aspects of the product development. We also initially identified the sort of IUK funding opportunity, which then grew into this project. And with Alison and Hannah and other members of our team, they developed a scope and produced the bid that was ultimately accepted. Within the project itself, NMIS led a number of workshops discussing how to develop and the importance of product specifications, how setting out good requirements at the outset of a project is good to kind of establish what you want to achieve, and then how to tackle verification and validation, as Alison's touched on there, and sort of activities around that to essentially ensure that the market needs and expectations and the product ultimately is accepted in the marketplace. Ayrshire College kind of took on a sort of bigger part in the product development in this project. So they were providing the marketplace research, textile insight, development of concept and CAD design, and essentially improving the product. They worked with Alison through a full product development cycle, improving on the existing design and key areas as Alison had identified them. And then this culminated in the manufacture of samples and potential British manufacturers that could be utilised by Floco to essentially help them moving forward in the competitive marketplace that they're in.
Thanks, Graeme. And a lot of that might sound quite daunting for a small business, particularly thinking about, how to manufacture, and Alison's particularly referred to it as being ethical manufacturing. So, given it might appear very, very challenging for a small business, how do you ensure that almost those communications and those barriers can be broken down in NMIS?
Well, at NMIS, we're industry focused. Many of our staff bring years of industry experience. Myself, I've got 17 years of industry experience, and similar to Alison, I need to kind of think about, is that number right? It doesn't get easier. But it's across many sectors, different skill sets across the centre. We're uniquely positioned between academia and industry, and bridging that gap is kind of one of the big things that we can offer. And it's really a big benefit for both parties, industry and academia. So essentially, we can identify departments, individuals within the centre, Strathclyde, broader academic community who can help and essentially brought on board, and that type of collaboration and access to specialised skills, knowledge, state-of-the-art technology and networks essentially demystifies a lot of the challenges for industry. It provides insight, it essentially offers time saving in terms of learning curves and what have you. And yeah, it's important. One of the things within our team, a vast majority of the inquiries we get are actually from SMEs who have products that they're looking to develop but don't necessarily have skill sets that cater fully to what they're trying to achieve. So we can help plug in and fill in gaps for that and help them develop. We've also recently in NMIS set up an SME engagement team specifically to help with outreach and assist SMEs who approach us. And then they also, part of their remit is to make sure that what we offer as a centre is the right type of support for SMEs and companies and organisations that we're catering at the right level.
Well, it's great to hear how very much universities and colleges are open and inclusive to all businesses working with them. And I think that's one of the kind of key themes we want to get across in these inclusive innovation webinars, is no mission is impossible at all. And Alison, from your point of view, you know, I know you kind of reflected on the fact that some of this, I suppose, early stage research had come out of your dissertation, but you know, if you stand in the shoes of perhaps a social entrepreneur that has never engaged with the university previously, what do you think the hardest thing is for a company thinking about collaborating with a university?
Oh, a couple of things. One is knowing who to contact. The universities end up being such massive institutions, finding the right person and then who needs to sign off and what does that look like and what kind of process do you need is a minefield in itself. And it is nice being able to give that to someone else and go, having done this before, who do you expect we're going to need to get this to signed off? If we want a couple of hours in a lab space, who actually has access to it? Who runs it? What are the timings? All of this kind of stuff. And the other is timescales. I think it's funny when you're a small business, you get to make decisions quite quickly and they're generally yours or yours and a couple of other people's. When you're working with multiple partners, especially universities and things of that size, things just take longer because they need to go and ask and check and get multiple people and multiple opinions, and someone is always away on holiday. And just knowing that and therefore expecting that makes life a lot easier, but were definitely things that initially I struggle with just knowing, who am I meant to ask this question to? What is a reasonable amount of time for this conversation to take? What am I meant to set to you as this is what the end project looks like? And I think some of that was, I came out of academia when I was like the littlest person, right? And you had your professors and your department heads and everyone who's above you. And on a project, you're suddenly even, and you've got to be able to say to them, this is what I expect it to look like. This is what done looks like. Where is that? That doesn't look like what I asked for. And that's a real shift. And so getting used to being able to have that conversation, having it in your head, what you expect them to do, was something that this project has really helped with, because Graeme's team helped me write a project plan. And I had the words I needed to be able to say, where is this? I mean, thankfully, Elaine from Ayrshire College was a godsend, so I never needed to go, it doesn't look like you've done this. But just knowing how to have that is more than, I think that is across the board working with organisations than just working with universities, but that's somewhere where this learning curve has really shown up for us.
So it really seems like the good communication and good project management is really helping you with other parts of the business as well. So there's a ripple effect of partnering in terms of other good practices that you can avail of. And you mentioned a little bit about the work that you're doing in terms of both supporting education and engaging in other countries. And because this webinar series is entitled Inclusive Innovation, and particular focus on health and social care, maybe could you explain some of the benefits that you're seeing, at close hand for health and social care from the work that you're doing?
That is some of my favourite parts, on being able to pick things up in a classroom. So one of the first things when we looked at teaching like menstrual health and what information do people need to know, it came back that a lot of the focus is often on your hormones and what the biological side looks like, without looking at like the social side of it. Yes, a period is you bleeding blood, but the social side is, have you got a product? Do you know how to change it? Do you know how to keep it clean? What does that look like? How do you have these kind of processes? And so that's what we started looking at in the classroom. And then we started adding in, what are all the other things you should know? Well, pain is one of them, in terms of what level of pain with a period is normal and what level indicates a health problem. And how do you have that conversation when you're 14 and in a classroom, and no one wants to terrify the poor people. But having that was suddenly fascinating, because we then had students go, oh, I didn't realize that I'm not meant to faint when I'm on my period. I'm not meant to vomit. I'm not meant to be in so much pain I can't move my legs. Actually, I need to talk to my mum about that. I need to ask to go to the GP. When I'm at the GP, I need to be using these words. And it was like, oh yeah, but if you don't know, if you're always told that this could be painful, it's really hard to know what is normal amounts of pain and what is, when do I get help and who do I get help from and how do I have that conversation? And so from some things like that, that's been fascinating to know that we are literally able to keep those girls in a classroom and performing, because they're not any good when they're at the nurses with their feet up because they've just fainted in science class. And the other thing is seeing that confidence change. We often walk in and the girls will not talk. They look like they want the floor to swallow them when we start talking about periods. And then it comes out. They're like, oh, the boys raid our school bags for period products to tease us. Or if we're in gym class, people will make comments about whether or not they can see that you have a pad on and all of this. And being like, okay, well, let's change this dynamic. Let's look at those words. Is that an acceptable sentence to say to someone? Does that constitute harassment, bullying, being nasty in your school? What are the processes for dealing with it? And by the end, you start to see people actually check each other or become more aware of, oh, I hadn't realized saying to someone, oh, you're being so moody, you're definitely on your period, you should just shut up, isn't fair in a science classroom. It's not fair in a STEM subject. It's not fair across the board, but when you're doing it in those, you're definitely marginalizing. And so some of it has been amazing to start to see that balance come through. And internationally, we see it on a very different scale, but just as cool. And so,
and in terms then of the kind of, I guess, the way the business has been set up, you're obviously passionate about the education within the schools, but you're also able to sell your profits online and products online. And that then will help on the education side. Is that the kind of business model and social innovation that you've managed to develop?
Yeah, we're still very much chewing through what the best model is that fits for us. And so we work on a 10% of our revenue from product sales is immediately transferred to our international side, and that funds free products, training, working with partners. And then the aim is as well that it can support staff, it can support training so that we can send staff into school for free and do this training without having to worry about does that cost the school, what schools can pay. So we're really working on a model of what can we add value, what products can we sell, and how can that fund our other initiatives to make sure that they all fit together and get to the people that need them.
Perfect. And Graeme, if I can bring you in, Alison referred to kind of two of her top tips in working with universities around communication and kind of almost the skills around project management. If I flip that on its head, you've had so many different varied collaborations across NMIS and working with a whole variety of different businesses. What would be your top tips, I suppose, from the kind of what you've witnessed over the past 17 years or otherwise in terms of building for success?
Unfortunately, it comes down to a bit of a recurring theme, but I would say the most important thing is just to define what you want to achieve from a project from the very start. It's absolutely vital so that everyone knows what their expectations are, what's real, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. In any project we take on in NMIS, we'll generate a statement of work that's issued at the quotation stage, so right before we've even really agreed to work. And this means that both parties are agreeing to what's in scope, what's out of scope, what the deliverables are going to be and the timeline around that. And then, although we can handle changes in scope as a project progresses and then make mature in a slightly different direction, it's best to try and capture all this stuff at the very beginning. So any questions, clarifications and alterations that might be needed to that scope or statement of work, it's best to get those at the start. So it's very much never be afraid to sort of challenge or engage at that early stages, just to make sure that everyone knows what's going to happen and what's sort of expected. And then there's no wasted effort on any party's side in terms of explaining things over and over, or in terms of people working on something that's maybe already been defined or already captured elsewhere and going off piece kind of thing.
So spending that time at the beginning almost and making sure everybody is agreed with what's going to be involved is really critical.
Absolutely, yeah.
Making a win-win and a successful outcome for all. And we've kind of talked about a collaboration in a lot of different ways, but there may be kind of longer term options for the university and the business to stay, or the NMIS and the business to stay engaged. And do you see those in kind of a long-term partnerships, and how have they evolved?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We within NMIS will support clients at various stages in their process. So we might be involved at the very beginning in sort of initial conceptual studies, and that might take the form of like an innovation voucher or something. And then we also might be doing a full larger scale product development project, or even ultimately an optimization of manufacture and production processes. But regardless, we can help clients identify, access potential funding calls, and generally whatever is needed to support their development. What's interesting is we've actually seen quite often that through sort of small projects and initial engagements which haven't been large value in terms of money, but maybe large value in terms of impact, they often can lead to sort of future projects and future opportunities for collaboration. So we've had a lot of clients and SMEs come back and speak to us again with opportunities as they kind of mature and go through their overall cycle and development journey.
So no matter what idea an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur may have, there's ways of making that happen. And you've mentioned the Innovation Voucher Programme that the team here at Interface support and administer. And, you know, that's small pots of money, maybe in some instances up to £5,000 to help offset the cost. But I think even for NMIS are critical in building that trusting relationship.
Absolutely is, and it's a really important way of sort of gearing that money and that small investment into something that can be significantly bigger and kind of steer a greater direction for the business. So yeah, we've seen some really positive results out of innovation vouchers.
Good to hear, good to hear. And Alison, speaking of kind of successfully levering funding, in March 2021, you were actually selected to receive one of Innovate UK's flagship Women in Innovation Awards. So many congratulations on that. And that was very much a programme to boost the number of UK female entrepreneurs. So as a social innovator and entrepreneur, you know, what have you learned from engaging with the other female entrepreneurs?
It has been, I'm now like, oh, how real should I get with you all? Fascinating to talk to them and realise how many issues across the board we all share in terms, sorry, the drones are working from home. Of course, the doorbell chooses that moment. Yeah, in terms of, for some of it, just the levels of confidence that some of us have in talking to different bodies, in presenting ideas, in staying by our guns when we believe in something, it is got a gender dynamic, and I find that fascinating and heartbreaking in two different versions. So from that side, it's been really cool to be with another cohort of women who are mostly trying to build something. When you build, like physically build a product versus build a service or build an online thing, they all have very different journeys. And it's always exciting to me when I'm like, oh, you're someone else that has a supply line. So from some sides of it, it's been very cool to do that. It's been a lovely group to bounce ideas off and be like, how is everyone else coping with this? And nice to know that, you know, we're not alone in that, but also so inspiring to see some of the other cool things that are in the making, because sadly, innovation takes a long time to come to market, and getting to see them at early stages and be like, wow, your view of the world and how we can make it better is fascinating. And then from a personal point of view, to be supported by Innovate is pretty cool. So that gives me a nice buzz, but you know, that's probably less of a thing that you want to know about.
No, it's a great achievement for you as a kind of early stage entrepreneur. So well done on that. And we have we're due to wrap up about 15 minutes time. So I think I've spied some questions coming through on the chat. So maybe we just open it up for a couple of questions. Fiona, were there some questions to add in here?
Yes, we have one question, which is from Harriet, and this is for Alison. So Harriet was wondering, within your education remit, whether there has been any thought about working with families too, thinking about transgenerational issues regarding communication and the negative comments you mentioned that can be prevalent in the home setting as well.
Oh, that is so true, Harriet. And it is, I don't know, also quite terrifying, the level of conversation that goes on at home around this kind of thing. This has been one of our many journeys with trying to set up a company, is where do we start and what issues do we focus on? And so right now we are trying to focus on working in schools where we have those resources. In the future, on my sticky note board of things I want to do, it is looking at how do we get into homes, how do you talk to the parents who probably most need the conversation and therefore often least want to have it, and how do we look about doing that? But it is definitely something on my list. Also, if it's something you are interested in, please drop me a line so we can chat.
And it's probably true, and I think Graeme referred to this as well, it's that there's so many different avenues as an entrepreneur that you can travel down, and you know, kind of a great idea there in terms of education within the homes. But How do you, Alison, focus? You know, you've got to make a profit as a business, but then there's the educational side. So how have you brought that rigor almost to yourself?
It's so hard. Like, I think that is one of the hardest things, especially when it is like, but this will do good and this will do good, and nothing is getting done because there are 101 projects ongoing. So there now literally is a post-it board of all the ideas we want to have and all the cool things we want, purely to give it an idea of like, look, there's been a pin put in, it does still exist, it hasn't disappeared into a void. I have fallen in love with an online platform called Ducalis, where I can add in all my tasks and then use basically an analysis framework to work out what is the highest priority, and then it just puts them into a priority order list. So for smaller things, it now goes that way. For bigger things, they go on a board. We choose 2 at a time. When one of them is done, the next one is allowed to be looked at. But other than that, they have to stay there, which is something I struggle with and spend a lot of time talking to people about, but has made a massive difference than trying to do 50 things at once, because sadly, none of them get done at that rate.
Well, there's a top tip of the day. Look up for Ducalis and look at that as a self-management tool of ideas and inspirations. Are there any other questions that people would like to pose to Graeme or Alison? Okay, nothing forthcoming at the moment, but I'll bring Graeme back into the conversation then in terms of you know, what next in terms of the partnership with Floco, Graeme? Where do you think we'll be in a year's time if we're catching up with you?
Well, really, product development's kind of a consistent cycle. So as Alison's product grows and reaches new heights and success, then there may be future opportunities in future developments. Technology doesn't stand still as well, so there might be things that open up as a result of potentially upscaling or just new developments in the marketplace and the sector. So I think there's probably certainly other opportunities for us to work together on this and maybe other similar products.
Can I add into that, Siobhán?
Yeah, because you're in the spotlight. I think there's a question coming for you, Graeme, from James.
Yeah, there certainly is. So James has asked, Floco started small with a big idea. Can organisations of any size make contact via interface if they have an idea that needs developed?
Yeah, I mean, we've engaged with people that have just literally in their house with an idea for a product sitting in a sketchpad sort of thing, and they have an idea and a market need that they think they can meet, and they can engage with us, to large organizations. The size of the customer doesn't necessarily matter. It's more just if you have something that you think would potentially make a difference and is good and people would need it and use it, then yeah, certainly feel free to contact NMIS. That's what we're there for.
That's great. Thank you, Graeme. And in terms of the, I guess, health and social care agenda, it's very broad, Graeme, in Scotland. And I assume there are many different ways that you can be working and supporting manufacture for the health and social care entrepreneurs or companies or established enterprises. And that will encompass quite a broad range of companies.
Yeah, we've had a few sort of projects or potential bids in that sort of field. Unfortunately, I can't go into too much details due to NDAs and various bits, but yeah, a lot of it's been around inclusivity. Specifically, we've been working on some around sort of disabilities within the Scottish workforce and making sure that we're being inclusive in the design of manufacturing equipment, that sort of thing. So there's been some really interesting projects in that theme.
And I think that whole manufacturing with an ethical conscience is probably coming to the fore as well, along with making it as productive and as efficient as possible. So lots to draw on.
Definitely.
Good. Alison, as we kind of move towards the end of our fireside chat, maybe just a quick word from you in terms of what are your aspirations for the next 3 years? What do you think will be next for Floco? Now that you've just rebranded as well.
Now we've rebranded, we've transformed from, what did someone say to us the other day, a baby into like a toddler now. We're looking at, that was the student brand, this is the new one that looks shiny, that's ready to say we're ready to take on the world. And right now we're really focusing on shoring up our UK sales, so doing what we can to make sure that the website talks nicely, that people can find us when they need to, and then focusing on international, putting in a proper framework. Yeah, I know, all the fun stuff. So that we're working nicely with organizations. And then by mid next year, we want to be taking an organization a month through that process so that we're setting up sellers around the world and getting better access to good period products.
So that's very exciting, because you'll have this international network of supporters, and that will also help on the education side.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, we've got a load of work going on in September as we speak to quite a lot of different schools and start setting up the puberty education. And then there is something into play that I'm not actually sure I'm allowed to talk about yet, that will get lots of different university students and school students working together on teaching puberty and gender inequality right across the UK.
That's fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and insights and your journey from from your dissertation through to education, through to manufacturing, and now kind of consumer product as well. So it's been brilliant to see how many different roads you have travelled through working with Interface and through working with many different academic teams. Fiona, I don't know if we have any final questions.
No more questions.
Okay, if there's any other burning questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat. But before we kind of wrap up for this morning, some final words from me on the kind of call to action, and hope that you have been inspired by our first inclusive innovation webinar, and certainly, the featured case study and discussion with Alison has really shown the many different areas around health and social care that companies that we support can kind of travel along. If Joe can get the slides up, I think a couple of calls to action for everyone that's been attending. So the first call to action, I guess, is the fact that if you do want to kind of follow up with us, then there'll be an email that Joe will send out in the next few days, if not this afternoon, and gives you a kind of real way of getting in contact. So you can reach out via the website or the follow-up email that Joe is going to send. So do get in touch with us for an in-depth one-to-one discussion and explore what's possible. And the team very much work with you to understand your goals and objectives. As I said, no mission is impossible, and there's continuous support. And we discussed the Innovation Voucher Programme as a means of offsetting the cost. But as the next slide shows, there are also large-scale funding opportunities that are available. And here's one that's currently open for applications to specifically support social enterprises to develop products and services to tackle the impacts of healthy aging. So this is very much in line with our theme of health and social care, and full funding of up to £150,000 for individual projects can be applied for a total funding pot of 4 million. So lots to play for there in terms of if you're seeking to develop a new product or service to tackle the impacts of aging. If you want to know more, please feel free to get in touch and we can help on that one. The next slide really just shows the themes of our future webinars. As I said, today is first in a series of 14 across 7 themed sectors that you can see. And so we would really like you to kind of shout out to your businesses that you're working with, your partnerships, your associates, and to let them know of the work that we're doing here in showcasing enterprises in different sectors. And you can sign up for future webinars via the web link that James has just put into the chat. And in particular, the next slide just shows our next webinar that we're going to have on the 2nd of September. It's already open for registrations, and that focuses on the theme of environment and net zero, hugely important to Scotland. And you'll hear from Sustainable Thinking Scotland Limited and how they've worked with University of the Highlands and Islands to actually look at new production and application methods of biochar. And if you don't know what biochar is all about, then a good opportunity to tune in to look at how that is impacting on the climate. So a kind of call to action there from everybody to join us for the next webinars, but also to let your other partnerships and associates know of what we're planning to do. Thanks very much to Joe for sharing the slides, and to Fiona and James behind the scenes for helping out, and to all of you for attending. And a real thank you to Graeme and Alison for being so open and honest in sharing how the collaboration is delivering real benefits locally and internationally. Although Representative from Ayrshire College couldn't join us this morning, they have been also pivotal to this particular partnership. So we thank them also for their input. So please do get in touch to explore what's possible. We're all here to help, and a follow-up email will be with you shortly to kind of get, if you want to revisit this webinar, or indeed to get in touch. Have a great day and look forward to meeting you all again online. Thanks very much to all.